Alright, so welcome back to Dominion Nocturne, What's in the Box, Part 3. If you have not watched Part 1, or even Part 2, and this is your first time watching these segments, watch Part 1 first. Alright, so, now we're going to do the cards that are not in the supply, with some other cards that are obviously in the supply. And so, first of all, I wanted to go over the 2 heirloom cards that give you cards that are not in the supply. So first, I thought we'd go with the magic lamp. Now, in the previous video, if you somehow are able to get 3 wishes with the magic lamp, well, this is what a wish is. It gives you an action, you return this to its pile, and if you did, you gain a card to your hand costing up to 6. So basically, you can say, "Oh, I'm wishing for gold," or something like that. Well, regardless of whatever you wish for, as long as it's 6 or less, you can gain it to your hand. And you get an extra action. So this is like better to use like for an action card. So that way you can play an action card after you play the wish. And if you get 3 wishes from their pile, well, you'll be able to do this 3 times with your wish. So that's pretty cool. And then that's also sort of thematic, too, when you think about it. Now you're wishing for something. Well, when you wish, you usually get it right away if your wish is, obviously, answered. So that's kind of cool. But once again, not super down-to-earth. Not usually, anyway. But I went ahead and kept it anyway, because it didn't make sense to replace this if I didn't even replace that from the start. Alright. Then, we have this Scarab Heirloom. And so, if you watch the first video, like you should have, before watching this one, then you know that with this heirloom, you gain a gecko from its pile. And so this is what the gecko does, and it's a night duration card. You reveal cards from your deck until you reveal an action. Discard the other cards and set this aside. At the start of your next turn, you play it twice. So this is kind of an interesting alternative version of Throne Room, basically. But it's during your night phase that you'll play this. Now, in Dominion, you have your action phase first, usually. And then you have your buy phase. And then you have your cleanup phase. So you clean up all your cards and put them in your discard pile, etc., etc. So A, B, C. And when they made the night phase, obviously that messed that whole ABCs thing. And now there's a night phase. And the night phase happens after you clean up all your cards. Or, well, not really clean up all your cards. So now they took out the cleanup phase. And now it's A, B, N, C, basically. And so the night phase happens before your cleanup phase. But it happens after your buy phase. And they're similar to actions. They do some things that action cards would do. But because they're not action cards, they obviously are not treated the same way. Now, with action cards, you have to have actions in order to use action cards, which is why Village has been so popular, because you need lots of actions to play lots of action cards. But you don't need to do that with night cards. You can play as many night cards as you want, no limit. You're only limited to the amount of night cards you currently have. So that's something interesting about night cards, is you can play them as many times as you want, which is pretty cool. As in, you can play them, and then you can play another night card, you can play another night card, you can play another night card. I'm not saying you can play the same night card again and again and again and again. I'm just meaning you can play multiple night cards in a turn without a limit. So that's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. I like that. And so that's actually a pretty cool card. And, you know, it's hard to see, but there's the gecko. So, and I'm pretty sure that's a tokay. Well, I don't know if it's hard to say. It's definitely not it might be a tokay gecko, but I don't think it is. There's a lot of geckos on our planet. So I think that's more of a house gecko, if anything. So, anyways, so that's that. Now, let's continue on. So, then we have this card, the Ferret, and you get 2 treasure. And then if you have no other cards in play, you gain an owl from its pile Otherwise, each other player receives the next forfeit. Okay, well, now you're probably saying, okay, well, what's a forfeit? This card reminds me of a certain something, but what's a forfeit? Well, the forfeit is the same thing as the hex. I replaced a lot of, I wanted to replace a lot of those hexes, because they just reminded me so much of curses, the name itself, and since I didn't like a lot of the forfeits, just because of not being down to earth, I decided to go ahead and change the name to a forfeit. So, and that's still sort of like a negative word anyway. So, and it's definitely, obviously not positive either. So, yeah, I went ahead. I didn't replace all of the hexes. I just replaced the word hex with forfeit and replaced the ones that I wanted to replace. So, anyway, that's forfeit. And we'll talk about hexes, or should I say forfeits, in another video, as well as the boons, obviously. But you gain an owl from its pile. And here's a picture of the owl. So that's the owl. And I changed, this is a card that's actually very similar to one of the pre-existing cards that I replaced, but I also made things different as well. So it's not the same exact card per se. Alright, and we're not going to go over it right this second either. Okay, now another card that gives out cards that aren't in the supply is the Raccoon. There we go, better picture of him. Okay, so if the number of cards you've gained this turn is 2+, each other player gains a skunk. Okay, well, a skunk is actually a new card I created for this expansion. It's not in the original Nocturne. It's not in Nocturne at all. So it's my own addition to the game. So just consider it one of those blank cards I decided to add to the game, basically. And then you gain an owl. So if it's just one card you've gained this turn, you gain an owl. And if you didn't gain a single card, you get a fruit bat. So that's kind of interesting. And this card is gained to your hand instead of your discard pile. So if you buy this card, or you gain this card during your action phase or your buy phase, it's gained to your hand instead of your discard pile. That's pretty cool. Alright. Well, what other cards besides Raccoon give you cards that are not in the supply? Well, we have the Naturalist. Trash a card from your hand if it's a copper. So you can trash whatever card you want, but if you are trashing a copper, you gain an opossum. If it's an estate, gain a skunk, but you also gain a gold too. So, you're probably thinking, well, what's the skunk do exactly? Why do I gain a gold with the skunk if I trash an estate? That almost sounds like a bad thing, and it's sort of like a double-edged sword, but you'll find out later. Now, if it's an action card costing up to 4, you gain an owl, and if it's if it's a card that costs 5 or more treasure, you gain a fruit bat. So it's like an alternative way of getting a fruit bat, or an owl for that matter, or a skunk for that matter. But it also lets you possibly gain an opossum to boot, just by simply trashing a copper. And then if it's a gold that you're trashing, you gain a gecko. So this is where it's interesting. If you trash a gold, yes, you get a gecko, right? But since the gold costs more than 5, you're also going to get a fruit bat. That is cool. I did that on purpose. You're getting 2 cards by trashing a gold. It's awesome. It's exceptional. That's awesome. But I wanted to make it specific because I didn't want you to gain wishes with this card. I didn't, and that's the same thing with Raccoon. I made that very specific as well because I didn't want you to gain wishes or a particular card besides wishes with this card. So that's why I did it that way. I did it very exact. So the Naturalist. Alright. So, what's the other card that gives you a card that's not in the supply? Well, there's actually a couple, but for this video I think we only have time for one more. That's a card that's in the supply that gives you cards that aren't in the supply. So this is the Moth. Alright, and this is a night card as well. Each other player receives the next forfeit. gain a card costing up to 5 other than a moth, and then you exchange this for a caterpillar. So basically, the moth eventually dies, and now you've got a caterpillar, you know, because it laid a bunch of eggs, and so you got one of those caterpillars, basically. And so that's what I was thinking of when I made this card. So yeah, that's cool. Everybody gets a forfeit or a hex, and then, you know, gain a card costing up to 5 more than the moth. So that's pretty cool. So this allows you to gain a lot of good cards, obviously. And then you exchange this for a caterpillar. Alright, so we're going to do the other cards in the next video.